Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We have made it. We are to the cognitive unit, which is the biggest unit on the AP exam. You can see here it comprises 13 to 17% of the AP exam. So we're going to be spending quite a bit of time here. Now, before I even get to this next slide, you better know what cognitive means, OMG. But if you don't, refresher, we know that cognition is just the fancy word for thinking. Um, and memory is the main cognitive process that we study. That's kind of the biggie. But we know that cognition encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses decision making, which we say that's why we talk about thinking happens in the frontal lobe and prefrontal cortex. It encompasses language. It encompasses intelligence and a multitude of other things. But these are the ones that we're going to mainly talk about. Language, we'll talk about a little bit more in the developmental unit. So you won't see that here, but the rest we'll talk about in here a bit. So let's get into our definition of memory. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're talking about memory is kind of the main focus of the next week of this unit, at least. So, our definition of memory is the indication that learning has persisted over time through the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information experiences. Right? And we talked about our definition of learning as being something that's like a relatively enduring change in behavior or like something gained. So, right, memory is the indication that learning has persisted, right? That it's something that you have taken and stored and will be able to do again. So we're going to talk about this process of encoding, storage, and retrieval and what these terms mean and kind of the sequential order in which these happen and all the steps that go along with it. Okay. So we're going to talk about two different models of memory. The first one we're going to talk about is called the information processing model of memory. And again, this is kind of just going through these sequential steps in which memory storage happens. In this one, I think information processing, I kind of think of it as like the IT model, like having to do with a computer is a really good analogy here. So we first start with encoding. So encoding is the process of getting information into your memory system. So even just getting it to the point where we've recognized it, we're thinking about it, so it's in our brain, so we can then store it. So in coding, we have to think about it and rehearse. If you're rehearsing something, you're practicing it. So you kind of have to think about the memory so it can be, in your mind, ready to be stored. If you don't notice it or pay attention or think about it, right, it's not meaningful. It's not going to get stored. We have 5 million things happen to us in a day, but only some of that stuff goes into our memory system. So in our computer analogy, I think of encoding as like typing on a keyboard, right? It's like taking the information and like putting it into the computer, into the system, right? So encoding is kind of typing and putting it into that system and getting it there. Okay, next thing is storage. So this is what we're probably familiar with, which is just taking your memory and now you've got it in your brain, you're actively thinking about it. Now you're going to save it and put it in your filing cabinet away for later. Right? So you can think of it as a physical filing cabinet that you pull out, old fashioned. I should have one in my classroom because I'd be a lot more organized. So you can think of it that way, or in the computer analogy, you can think of it as just like, all your files organized in Google Drive or on your hard drive in your computer. Right? So storage is the process of taking that memory and then putting it in that filing cabinet to store and then be saved for later. And then retrieval is now you've stored that memory, but you want to think about it, right? So someone asks you like, what'd you do for your 5th birthday party? And now you have to retrieve it. So you have to take that memory out from storage and access that file. So that is bringing it back out to think about it again, right? So you stored it, say you stored your thing on your computer. Now it's going to open your file or whatever it is that you stored previously. So maybe it's your college essay you saved. Now you have to go open it again, retrieve it. Okay. So now we're going to add on the second model of memory. So this is the first one is the information processing model, kind of making it related to like computer type vibes. Then we're going to add in the second model, which is the Atkinson and Shiffrin model. These are two psychologists who came up with it. It's called the multi-store model of memory. And this is because it's talking about three different like storage places in your memory system. So we see here, these are the three. So we have sensory, and again, this is also a kind of a chronological order in which they go. So it's kind of sequential here. So kind of within, this is all kind of going on in the storage part. Oh, look at my kitty. This is all going on in the storage part. Okay. So our three stores. So the first store that your memory is going to go to in the process of storing it away forever is the sensory memory store. And sensory memory store is a very, very brief time that it's there. Sensory memory is kind of just where it's that part when we like just barely have paid attention to something. So it's often things we're not really like consciously super aware of. It's just kind of a fleeting moment. So sensory memory is consisting of iconic and echoic memories. Iconic are brief visual memories, and then echoic is brief auditory, like listening memories or sounds. So sensory memory, it's kind of almost just like what is going on in your present mind, like kind of what's actively being thrown in front of you that you're like just barely like remembering and aware of at that present moment. So in terms of how long information stays in your sensory memory, it's just kind of that very first step. It's in there really short. It's just where once you pay attention to it, like it hits your sensory memory, and once you actively start paying attention to it, it then goes into short-term or working memory. Short-term or working memory is where your memories that you're actively really thinking about and engaging with are happening. So sensory memory, like I said, is just kind of, it's what's going on at the current moment, but you're not even like aware of it. It's kind of just what's visually, auditory, in front of you, but you haven't really picked it up yet. Once you pick it up and kind of notice it, that's in your short-term working memory. And they use the term working memory because it's kind of like a mental workbench where you're actively kind of like playing with these ideas and thinking. So if you're like studying here, right, you're kind of like working on making a memory. And it's also called short term because it only stays in there briefly when you're actively thinking about it. Because then if we want to have something stored permanently, it's going to go to long term. So short term only holds a few things for a short amount of time. And then we move on to long-term memory, which is the process of actually storing it in that filing cabinet on your hard drive forever. And we know that the store here we're going to talk about is unlimited. So that's just your brief overview of the Baddeley model of multi-store memory. And here we're going to see that each store of those three stores that I brought up differ in terms of duration. So how long information can be stored for? Is it permanent, or is it only staying in that store for a limited amount of time? And capacity. So how many things can you be thinking about or storing in these stores at once? Is it unlimited? You can be thinking and storing bajillions of memories, or can you only be working on a few things at once? So we're going to go through each one more in depth. So sensory memory, like I said, is that fleeting, brief memory of sensory info. Iconic, like I said, you can think iconic. Visual memories, the capacity, it contains kind of most of what's going on like in that present moment in front of us. So it contains a lot of things because it's kind of everything that's going on at once, but the duration's so short, it's less than a second. And then echoic, same thing, contains like all the sounds going on in our present moment, but the duration, again, minuscule, super short, about 1 to 3 seconds. And you can kind of think about this, like why is echoic longer than iconic? And if you're thinking about like when you try to remember something, what do? You're gonna like say it out loud and repeat it. And like I know you guys don't have to remember phone numbers as often as like older generations, but right, if you're trying to remember a phone number or like a passcode or something, you're going to repeat it out loud. And that's because it just stays a little bit longer. So you can remember that. Short-term working memory, like I said, is short-term. So it only has a duration of about 15 to 30 seconds that you're actively kind of working with these memories and thinking about them. But then capacity is about 7 plus or minus 2 items. Remember that. Ingrain it in your brain. 7 plus or minus 2 items is the capacity. It's the magic number. Again, going back to the remembering like a passcode or a phone number example, phone numbers are kind of like the magic number that we can remember. So if you think of like a phone number, let's see. Okay, yeah, so they're like 10 numbers. So that's a little bit out of kind of over what we can typically remember in short-term working memory, right? I had to think about how many numbers are in a phone number, right? So that's kind of pushing it. So we see that we have to chunk phone numbers into like, 222, 752, 0000, right? You break it up because it's a little bit out of what you can consciously and actively work with in your short-term or working memory. So capacity, 7 plus or minus 2 items. And that's why, again, when you guys are trying to remember a phone number, it's not going to stay there very long. You have about 15 to 30 seconds where you can really remember it before it goes kaput. So that's why you guys engage in rehearsal, which is the act of saying it over and over again, chunking it, breaking it down in smaller sections to try and expand the capacity and the duration of your short-term or working memory. So you can remember it short-term and it's a limited capacity, that magic number 7 plus or minus 2. Now we've made it to long-term memory, right? Not all memories get here. We know that some things aren't going to go from your sensory to your short-term, right? You have to actively pay attention to something in your sensory memory, which is containing tons of things, right? Large capacity, for it to get into short-term working memory. And then from there, you still have to, really rehearse it and be mindful to get it stored into that permanent storehouse of long-term memory. So long-term memory, its capacity is unlimited and its duration is unlimited. So it contains as much as you want forever and ever. And obviously we know that there's certain memories that are hard to get or we forget. It's not necessarily that they disappear, but sometimes we have things that are blocking them or issues that prevent us from accessing them. But that long-term memory is like a permanent storehouse. So moving on, I won't do all our little games here. So like I said, rehearsal is the idea of trying to keep information in your short-term memory. Right. And like that's when you're repeating something, like repeating a phone number, repeating a license plate number to try and remember it. So maintenance rehearsal is that like repeating things a bunch to try and expand that length of short-term memory so you can remember something longer to, dial it in your phone or write it down or do whatever. So maintenance rehearsal, you just think you're rehearsing, you're thinking about it, you're trying to expand out that duration of your short-term memory. Okay, so within long-term memory, there's a lot going on because obviously it's like your limitless storehouse. So there's multiple divisions within long-term memory that we got to talk about here. So within long-term memory, we have 2 main divisions of automatic or effortful processing. Automatic processing are memories that are kind of unconscious that we don't have to think about. So often these are things that, like they say, riding a bike, you don't have to think about it. Lots of things where you process these and now they've become automatic to the point where you don't have to recall that memory consciously to think about it. Your body just kind of does it. Then effortful processing is for memories where you do have to think about them. So you pull them out and it's stuff that you are consciously, actively thinking about. So let's get into the division. So the first, so we said automatic processing. This is also called implicit memory. And you can think implicit, you can think kind of like internal, like you don't have to really think about it. It's kind of just an internal thing that your body's doing that you don't even have to consciously think about. So implicit are your unconscious memories that your body just does through like muscle memory. So classically conditioned associations, right? So say you have a phobia. Again, you don't have to consciously think about that. Like your body kind of has that, those classically conditioned reactions. You really don't have to think about that, right? It's kind of just been ingrained unconsciously in you, right? So in Pavlov, the dog starts salivating at the sound of the bell, right? That's an automatic and implicit memory because the dog is not consciously thinking like, bell, like, I'm going to start drooling, right? It's automatic. Procedural memory is your memory for motor skills of how to do things. So riding a bike, walking, anything, right? You don't have to think about walking. You don't have to think about really riding. You don't have to think about riding a bike. Once you know how to do it, they're your procedural memories. So they're kind of unconscious things that your body just does through muscle memory. And these, the cerebellum actually has an important role when it comes to memories. The cerebellum, we know, is the part of the brain that deals with movement and coordination, balance, etc. But it also helps in terms of your muscle memory. So it is connected to memory. So remember that cerebellum's connected to that automatic or implicit memories like procedural memories. Now, let's get into effortful processing, so memories that you have to actually consciously think about and grapple with. So, these are processed in your hippocampus. So, when you're first storing them, it's more the cerebellum that helps with the implicit memories. And when you're first storing explicit, it's more the hippocampus dealing with it. So, again, these are also called explicit memories, which are, again, just conscious ones that you actually like when you're storing them, you have to really put thought and like conscious effort into. And when you recall them, you have to put conscious effort into it. So the two divisions within these are semantic memory, which is your memory of facts. So remembering capitals, remembering formulas. You studying for AP Psych is very much using your semantic memory because there's tons of vocab words. Then there's episodic memories. So these are remembering like events or experiences in your life. Like you can think like an episode of a TV show, right? It's an event, it's things that take place in your life. So remembering your birthday party, remembering the time that you went to state, remembering all these happy or sad, whatever types of memories are episodic memories. So you can think episodic event, EE, or episodic like an episode of TV where you're looking at like events that happen. So here's a good picture that I like that kind of shows what's going on, right? We see when things are automatically processed, they kind of bypass this whole working short-term memory thing where you're grappling and thinking about them. They're automatically processed and go straight to long-term. When things are are explicit and you have to consciously think about them, they go through this whole process of sensory memory, working memory, then into long-term. And again, I want to emphasize that when things are in working memory, it's not just new things that you are encoding and storing. It is when you're taking a memory to think about it. So you stored a memory and you're thinking about your fifth birthday party. That goes from long term back into working or short term memory because you're grappling about it. Short term working memory is whatever you're actively thinking about. So it contains not only new memories being made, but also old memories you pulled out that you're thinking about. Okay. So there you have it. That is kind of just the overview of memory and that sequential processing of how we encode, store, and retrieve memories. All right.